Hi, I'm Brenda,
And hi, I'm Amber.
and this is the Minority Millennial Money Podcast. The contents of this podcast are informational in nature and are not legal or tax advice, and neither Amber nor I nor Minority Millennial Money is engaged in the provision of legal, tax, or any other advice. You should seek your own advice from professional advisors, including lawyers and tax accountants, regarding the legal, tax, and financial implications of any financial decision you contemplate. Welcome to another episode of Minority Millennial Money. Today we have a couple of topics, probably be pretty short, but they're topics that have come up both in our personal lives and in our Twitter lives lately. And the first one is about good debt. And I think that we have kind of emphasized the fact that you want to be out of debt, as much as possible, as long as it makes sense. And so I have a couple of examples in which I had the money to pay something off, but I didn't pay it off because it didn't make sense. I wasn't going to save that much on the interest of whatever it was I was paying back than if I paid it all up front. So what's a good example of that, Amber?
Yeah. So I love, first of all, that our Twitter lives are legit and we have a real life and a Twitter life. But so I think home mortgages is a good example. Obviously I don't own right now, but I see this on Twitter all the time where people will be like, we just dumped our whole brokerage account into our mortgage. Yay, we're debt free. We're having a baby next week and now we have put all this money into the house. And it just really bothers me because a home mortgage is 3% interest. Maybe if you get a bad mortgage, it's 4% interest. So you mean to tell me that instead of paying all that money over the course of 30 years, you're just going to give it to to put it into your house for what? And then what happens if your home value goes down? You just lost literally $100,000 or $200,000. Why would you do that? Because the thing about brokerage accounts is you always have that money handy. So push come to shove, you can sell a stock and get the money the next day or however long it takes.
Right.
So that's basically cash in the bank. And to put it into your home, I think it's just, it's nonsensical. The interest that you're paying on that is not high, especially if you're a high earner or you already have money. You obviously have some money if you have, hundreds of thousands of dollars in your brokerage account. I just can't imagine why you would not carry that debt. Just to feel emotionally better about being debt free. Yeah, you're debt free. And then what happens if your house burns down? You have nothing? Because that happened to me. My house burned down.
It does happen.
Yeah,
no, and I have a friend of a friend whose house burned down the week of their wedding and they lost everything in there. But I think that's a great example with interest rates being so low right now, right? I think when my parents bought a house back in the 80s, the interest rate was in the teens. So back then it probably would have made sense, but now that interest rates are so low, it doesn't really make sense to pay your house off early unless the peace of mind aspect is just so important to you that you don't want to live without a mortgage. And frankly, in my city where the taxes are so high, I'm never going to be without a living expense. Even if my mortgage was paid off, I'd still have a $500 or $600 monthly bill in taxes.
Yep.
So it's it's not I can just completely erase it. And then I think I was telling you before we recorded that I've had, for example, when I got my master's, my hospital paid for most of it, but there was a little bit that I had to pay back to them because I left that job because they didn't have a position for me. So when I had to pay it back, I took a personal loan because they were demanding that money, when I left the job. Wow. And I took a personal loan and it was at 9%, but it wasn't a big amount of money. It was less than $5,000. I just didn't want to hand over a check for $5,000. At that point, I had just bought a condo. I was not cash rich. I was cash poor at that time because I had just put a bunch of money into this condo. And eventually, once things settled down, I had the $5,000 to pay. but I was like, I have 5 years to pay these $5,000. The payment is like $120 a month. And it's I can pay that very easily. And if I pay this off, I'm going to save less than $500 in interest over 5 years, which is $100 a year, which is like $10 a month, less than $10 a month, $8 a month.
Right.
So I was like, I pay $8 a month to keep those $5,000 in my bank account in case I lose my job.
Yep.
You know, whatever, in case I need cash. And so in that sense, it didn't make sense for me to pay off that loan. Mm-hmm. I paid a little bit over, like I think the payment was $120 and I might have paid $150. I just kind of rounded up. Yeah. But I never threw chunks of money at it. And I didn't have big student loans. So I did pay those off aggressively because I didn't want them hanging over me. But had I known about I don't think public student loan forgiveness was around in 2011 when I graduated. It might have been, but I just didn't know about it. And it's actually really hard to get a public nursing job. Mm-hmm. Most healthcare is privatized nowadays. And so I don't work in a field where public service loan forgiveness is as easy, say as in teaching or social work or something else like that. Because I know you have put off paying your student loans.
Yes. And I'm glad I did, to be honest. So I have student loans from law school only. So I only have like, I don't know, $70,000. Well, only. I know for a lot of people, $70,000 is a lot of money. But I mean, I have more than that. I could pay those right now if I wanted to, but I'm absolutely not going to because one, I feel like, so I've been in public service work for almost 7 years. I'm nearing my 7-year anniversary in a couple months. So I have 3 more years that I have to continue doing public service in order to get those forgiven. So, I mean, I'm fine with paying the monthly payments. And actually now due to coronavirus, like I haven't made a payment in over a year because the student loans were paused and they're
paused again.
Yes. Now. So they've been paused for a while. And so like, I don't have to make another payment as of right now until February.
Is interest accruing? I don't know how that works.
Interest is not accruing. And the payments count towards my 10 years, if that makes sense. So over this past year, I have not paid. And those payments of $0.
Count the time.
Yes, it counts towards. And then your first year, your payments are usually 0 also because it goes by your last year's tax return. And I was in law school, so I didn't make any money. So your first year usually is $0 payments. So that's like multiple years of me paying nothing. And then whenever it rolls around while I do have to make a payment, whatever, that will count towards the 10 years. So over 10 years, I will have paid less money than I owe the government. And it's over 10 years versus me trying to pay it all off in 1 year or 2 years or 3 years or whatever the case is. So it's working.
And you're investing that money.
I'm actively investing like a lot. Like I invest probably over 50% of my income and I have multiple jobs. So, right. Yeah. So I mean, that's one of the reasons why I've been able to build wealth. And I'm sure no one likes to hear that, right? Like no one wants to hear like, oh my God, this wealthy lawyer is like doing this, but like
gaming the system. It's like, well, you're also a public service worker. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it's like, we owe it to you in a sense. I'm like all for the public service loan forgiveness because I think it's like a really good way to keep people in public service and help you not have to manage that debt.
Yeah. And frankly, it's a little shocking. Like I'm in the military. It's a little shocking that everyone in the military's loans isn't paid off to me. Like I can get called at any time to deploy. And in fact, I know a lot of soldiers who deploy Iraq, Afghanistan, they have student loans. Like what? Like that's just insane to me that we would live in a country where, and I'm not like a liberal extremist by any means. I'm actually fairly conservative, but like, it's just crazy that people would serve the country, go to war, maybe have a traumatic brain injury and like still have student loans. Just like a little crazy.
Right. But I mean, that is an extreme example of someone having a traumatic brain injury. But I do think that if you go on permanent disability, your student loans do get forgiven.
Oh, really?
I'm open to being corrected, but I believe that if you get on SSI, Social Security income, for a disability, that your student loans become forgiven. But you can never, like, you have to stay poor.
Yeah.
You know, you have to stay living on that income, which is very, very limiting. But
well, in the military, you don't necessarily get discharged if you get a traumatic brain injury, because a lot of people who've served have them and they still are serving. It depends on how bad it is, and it depends on how disabled you are. But yeah, a lot of people, continue serving. So, but yeah, crazy. But yeah, anyway, like I do think that like there's sometimes where you can use debt to your advantage. And I think people get very emotional about having debt. And so it's just like people who don't want to invest, right? Like people who save a bunch of money and just have it in their savings account, which is, I still don't really understand.
Right. I think I have a good amount of money that makes me feel secure, and also like I have a very not only lucrative but dependable job, right? So like nurses are always going to be needed. You can always go get a job somewhere. So I'm not super worried. Like if I were to lose my job, if all went to hell and I dropped out of my PhD program and I stopped getting that stipend and nobody wanted to hire me in Austin, Texas, well, that's okay. Like I just go 30 miles outside the city to some rural clinic or hospital and they're desperate for nurses. You know what I mean? So I do have that to fall back on. But there was something else I think that's been bothering you more than me that we've been seeing on social media, and that is the concept of credit repair.
Oh my God. Okay, like the reason I get upset is because so I know about a lot of like scammy things, right? I grew up in Chicago, arguably the hood, and the hood, as people colloquially speak. And so I am very knowledgeable about scams. And when I see that people are like credit repair, first of all, I know a lot of people that's a hustle for them, like an illegal hustle. They tell you that they're going to repair your credit. And what they do is they do something where they like open up a bunch of lines of credit, and then it makes it seem like your credit shoots up. But then after a couple months, your credit goes back down because they didn't actually repair it. The only way you can repair your credit is by pulling your report from the credit bureaus, seeing what the delinquent things on your credit and paying them back. There's no like credit repair person.
Well, and I think we brought this up too earlier, that the hardest part of credit repair is just coming to terms with how bad it is, what you owe, what you're delinquent on, making those calls to see if, they'll lower the interest rate, if they'll negotiate with you to, if you owe $3,000, if they'll take $1,500 and just close the account. And in a way, like Dave Ramsey appeals to people who cannot handle having credit. Because if you don't have a credit card, then you can't get into debt. But I feel like if you have a bachelor's degree, like you should be able to have the discipline and critical thinking skills to manage a credit card, to pay it off on time. And if something becomes delinquent, like a couple times maybe in my life, I've forgotten, right? Like it's not like I just couldn't pay it, but I just forgot. And I called them and I was like, so sorry, this just slipped my mind. They hadn't even reported it to any credit bureaus. And I just called and they took care of it. No late fee, nothing. But it's just like that effort of becoming aware and then trying to fix the problem, where I think a lot of people psychologically just can't do that, because then you have to face the fact that something has to change.
Yeah. I do think that people are very emotional. And so the idea of facing their problems head on is really difficult for them. Like, I think I'm a naturally aggressive person. So like, if there's an issue, like I naturally want to just be like, what's the problem? And I want to brainstorm ways to fix it instead of being like, oh my gosh, I have all this, I don't know what to do. My credit's bad. Like, I think people are just like, they just want to complain about it. And I'm very much like, I just want to fix it.
Right. And I think we're both like that. And so that has helped us significantly in our financial lives, but not everyone is like that and they need a little push, Yeah. There is one more thing I want to talk about, because I use Personal Capital for managing like my net worth and keeping track of all my accounts and the value of my homes, etc. And one of their advisors reached out to me, and we talked on Friday, and he's going to do an analysis of my portfolio. And he said that, you know, I have some overlap. Most of my asset allocation is in ETFs, index funds, maybe some mutual funds. But I got pretty good returns last year. You know, I got close to 20%, and this year is about 13.2%. And we're going to meet again on Monday because he's doing the analysis before we meet. And essentially they're trying to sell me their services, right? And I'm kind of like at a crossroads where I'm like, do I take their advice and make sure I know how much it's costing me in the long term? Because the expense of that could be like 1% over the course of my lifetime, you know. And right now, when I'm just at about 150,000 invested, 1% is $1,500. But when you're at $1 million, it's $10,000, right? So y'all stay tuned, because I'm going to talk to them on Monday and see. Part of me is like, they are professionals, right? And I'm not. But I'm also fairly educated in how my assets should be allocated. And it's not like I have 3% returns. Like if I was like, man, everyone else is making a ton of money and I'm not, then I'd be like, I definitely need some help, you know, but I'm not there. And I was actually talking to a friend who's also on Twitter, and she has a course on this 6-figure stock portfolio. Bridget Casey, if anybody knows her. And I was like, hey, I'm thinking about either taking your course or having these personal capital people, you know, help me. And she asked me about my returns, and they were pretty close to hers. I mean, like, I think she got 13.5 this year and I got 13.2. And I think she got closer to 24 last year and I got 20. So she's like, you know, if you want to take the course, like you could have gotten 4% more last year. I mean, am I devastated about that? No, like it's fine. I put zero effort into my strategy last year. All I did was put money in the account, right? But then I wonder, like, maybe I could give them a year and see what happens. Or I could just be like, no, I'm okay. Like, thanks for the advice, but I don't need active management. What do you think about that?
So as people already probably know, so I have active management. I really like it because, you know, I have this goal to retire at 50. And actually, I just talked to my financial wealth management person last week. And I was like, listen, we got to do some recalculating because, you know, I'm in a different job now. And, you know, whenever I change how much money I'm putting in or however much I think it's going to be in my 401k, I want them to do a new portfolio for me. Like, I want them to tell me, like, what's the percent chance that I'm going to hit this amount at this age? Like, I want them to tell me, like, what their advice is. And, like, he's actually given me a lot to think about. Like, he wants me to put more in my 403B plan with the government job I have now. And I'm, like, on the fence about that. But it's still a good recommendation and something that, like, you
wouldn't have considered otherwise. Yeah, even just on that one call, he talked to me about the 457B that I have access to through my university job.
Yeah.
And you can actually take money out of a 457B early without any penalty.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, oh, that could be the account that I, you know, really blow up so that I can use it between 50 and 59 and a half.
Right.
That can be the account that I penalty-free live off of. Before I can access my 401k and my Roth IRA. So I was like, oh, that was a piece of advice that even though I'm like into these things, I hadn't considered.
Yeah, it's different when you're paying someone to look directly at your stuff. Like, and they do my Roth conversions for me. Like, I put all the money into my IRA every year and they convert it to Roth for me. I don't have to do anything.
Okay.
So, and he's actually the one who told me that, like, oh, just add to this. And I was just like, what's the point? Because for me, I don't get any deductibility because I make too much money to get any deductibility from the IRA. And I was like, why would I even put money into the IRA? I might as well just put it into brokerage.
So you do a backdoor.
Right. And he was like, no, because you can put it into the traditional IRA and then it'll just grow tax free and then I'll do the conversion for you. And I was like, oh, okay. Like,
so it is worth it. So, okay, we'll see what they say on Monday and I'll decide if it's worth it. I'm kind of at that point where I'm like willing to pay a little bit for the convenience of knowing that that's being optimized, especially as my investments grow a little bit more. So
I also like that you can sue. They have a fiduciary duty to you. If they give you bad advice, you can sue them.
That's right. That's right. They are fiduciary.
If I lose $100,000, I'm suing the crap out of Merrill Lynch, Bank of America. You better believe it. I'm getting that money back.
You would bring up suing.
I'm just saying, like, it
is your money.
Thing. Yeah. Like if you lose your own money, no one cares. But if they lose your money.
Right. So it's kind of a little bit of an insurance too.
Basically.
Okay. All right. I could see that. We'll see. I guess it just depends on the fees. You know, if it's like more than 1%, I would be skeptical, because I remember we talked about this on the very first episode of this podcast. When I first, opened a brokerage account with Wells Fargo, it had to be $25,000. And I think the fees was like 1.25. Looking back, I'm like, oof, that was a lot, but we don't trust Wells Fargo anyway.
Well, what you could do is, now that you have money, you could shop around.
That's true.
Like, you could see whoever gives you the best offer. Usually they make you have $250,000, but I mean, they make exceptions all the time. Like, if you have, I think 100,000 is usually the minimum for like every single bank. So you could shop around.
That's a good idea. Yeah, I'll see what they offer me, and then I'll shop around a little bit. You have Merrill Lynch, right?
Yeah, Merrill Lynch Wealth Management.
Okay, good to know. So y'all should know there are times in which it's okay to keep debt. Feel free to message us or email us about that. Avoid credit repair. Just look at your credit report and pay off your debt. If it's over a certain amount of percent, like where you're paying tons of money a month to keep that debt, just get rid of it, right? And stay tuned and see what I do with my wealth management. If you're watching on YouTube, I am using quotations because I don't feel like I have real wealth, but we'll see.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.